Fiction and reality. New stories, new ideas. Little Beth Entertainment.
Hello, CG here with a quick programming note. We're going to be presenting to you on this Rocketry Show feed future episodes of the Model Rocket Show as well. So you're going to get both shows on this feed. And that just makes it convenient because we do know that many high-power rocketry folks still fly low-power rockets, and they're still very excited about that. So this gives you a chance to stay in touch with what's going on in the Model Rocket Show without having to jump around with different feeds. Now, the Model Rocket Show website and feed are going to stay the same. It's just going to be low-power rocket information there. And we're doing that because we want to make sure that we don't intimidate noobs by talking about this advanced stuff over there. So that's going to stay low-power rockets. And the Rocketry Show feed that you're listening to right now will have both shows going down the pipe as they are released moving forward. More information to come on other changes that we've been working on. But in the meantime, enjoy this episode of the Model Rocket Show with Neil Weinstock from Open Rocket. You definitely want to hear this before our episode of the Rocketry Show, first episode of Season 9 drops sometime this weekend. So enjoy.
Hey friends, it's your old pal, the Rocket Noob, and surprise, surprise, we got a new episode of the Model Rocket Show at TheRocketryShow.com. This episode, which we recorded some time ago, we are talking to Neil Weinstock about Open Rocket. Neil Weinstock is one of the developers working on Open Rocket, which is free, open source model rocket and high power rocket design and simulation software. We'll tell you where you can get it. It's free. And there are some exciting new updates. We did record this episode a while back, so I don't think there's anything in it that was meant to be a surprise that now no longer is a surprise. But just bear in mind that we did record it several months ago. And if you stick around to the end of the show, I got a little something for you. The Model Rocket Show. Thanks RocketryForum.com for their support. This is El Corinth. Of course, I should have picked Rocket Noob, but wasn't thinking about branding back when I joined over 8 years ago at the Rocketry Forum, which is a global community of rocketeers who openly discuss all aspects of hobby rocketry. So if you have a question, hop on and ask, because there are hundreds of experts who can answer just about any rocketry question you have. Check them out today at RocketryForum.com. All right, Neil Weinstock on the Model Rocket Show at TheModelRocketShow.com, starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Model Rocket Show, a podcast that is all about low and mid-power model rockets, like the ones you buy at hobby stores and fly in a park. And now, here is your host, Daniel the Rocket Noob.
All right, welcome to the Model Rocket Show at TheModelRocketShow.com. I would like to introduce our guest, Neil Weinstock, who is one of the developers of Open Rocket. What is Open Rocket? Well, Neil, can you tell us what is Open Rocket? How would you describe it?
Sure. Well, Open Rocket is a free and open source program that really has a few different purposes that are kind of related, but they each have their own separate sort of thrust. Primarily, it's for simulating the flight of rockets, evaluating the stability of rockets, and it's also a good tool for designing rockets if you're scratch building or if you just want to design paint schemes or those other kinds of things. So people use them for all three. Some people have higher priorities for one function than the other. Sometimes we squabble about which ones we should prioritize, but I think they're all pretty useful and all pretty important.
And how long have you been involved in the project?
I got involved. I sort of weaseled my way in around 2017, so I guess it's been about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I started off really not as a part of the team, but I made some packaged installers to make it easier to install the program. And I posted a sticky about that on the Rocketry Forum. And quite a good number of people use those. And it just simplified the Java-related issues, which can sometimes be a bit squirrely.
Yeah, I remember seeing that on the Rocketry Forum a few years ago. And at the time, I wasn't having any kind of issue with it. So I didn't bother installing it because I wasn't having any kind of problems installing it myself. But I remember seeing that post a while back.
Yeah.
I mean, and since we are talking about it, it's free open source software. So let's go ahead and talk about how do you get it and what are the system requirements for OpenRocket?
Well, the way you get it is you go to openrocket.info and you follow the download links. Right now, we are in the middle of our public beta program, so you'll find a little link that says that points you to the beta. And I would recommend at this point that we're pretty late in the beta process, so it's pretty solid. I would definitely recommend for most people that they try installing the beta. We have installers for Mac, Windows, and Linux. So,
And for those who are not as tech savvy as others, when you're referring to the beta, you're talking about a trial run of the next version, right?
yes, so we've been on a long journey since the last official version was 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and after that they went to implement pods, which we can maybe talk about later. But
Yeah.
the the software effort in doing pods, it really threw the whole code base for a loop, and it sort of got bogged down for a while. And I think some people were wondering if we were ever going to be able to put out another release, but eventually we got basically an entirely new team and grinded our way out and got it out the door in February. So we're hoping that sometime later in the summer, I think we'll be able to go out with the final version. But there's so many changes and such large changes in the program that we really wanted to get it out and let people test it so we could find problems and fix them. And it's been fantastic so far. We have gotten a lot of great bug reports and we've fixed a ton of stuff. So it's been good.
As somebody who uses OpenRocket a lot and has done so since I got started in model rocketry, and not knowing anything about who works on it, I know it's open source and everything, and I know that people can contribute to it. And also not being terribly tech savvy myself or understanding what it means to be open source or any of that stuff, I sort of thought, well, maybe they're just sort of picking away at it here and there, and I didn't even know if it was actively being developed or not. But I tell you what, it's just to give sort of an overview of what it is for beginners, people involved in model rocketry. It's basically you open it up, and it presents you with a design page, and you just start picking parts, a nose cone and a body tube, and you make fins, and it's pretty powerful tool, I would say, especially for model rocketeers. It's one of the things that makes me feel like we are in kind of people talk about the golden age of model rocketry being like the 60s and 70s. But I feel like with all of the tools that we have available to us, like altimeters and, special materials like, carbon fiber and stuff like that. And also with a tool like OpenRocket, which is, again, just to reiterate, it's a free software that you can download to your computer. You don't have to pay for it. And you can simulate any rocket in your fleet. You just have to know what the measurements are and the mass, the weight of the rocket. Or you can use it to design your own. As a matter of fact, the very first time I built a scratch-built rocket, I didn't know what I was doing. But I'd been playing around with OpenRocket, and I decided, you know what? I don't have a 2-stage model rocket. I'd kind of like one. I didn't have a kit. I thought, well, I have parts, and I have this OpenRocket. I could design a rocket. I could tell if it'll be stable. So it's a really powerful tool that I think it's a lot of fun to play around with. It's a lot of fun to just sort of try out different motors, virtually and see what they'll do for the rocket. And just play around and build really big rockets on your computer, even if you don't have a high power certification. I could design a level 3 rocket, flies on an M motor, and see what it would do, and it's pretty neat.
I think Sampo Niskanen, who was the person who originally wrote OpenRocket as a thesis project in 2009. I think he once posted an Open Rocket file of a full-size Saturn V, which was kind of funny.
That is.
But yeah, when I first got back into rocketry in 2015, I discovered Open Rocket pretty quickly, and I was just blown away by what I could do with it. I had never actually designed or scratch built a rocket before that. But once I started playing in Open Rocket, it's like I could visualize what I was doing, and that included visualizing the paint scheme and the decals and everything. And I really became quite addicted to it. And since then, I almost do exclusively my own designs and scratch builds, just because I really like using it, and I like the process. But I think it's important to note, especially for people who are more beginners, that you can just use it for, if you've built a kit, you can just use it for helping choose motors and choose delays and things like that. And you really don't have to go into a great deal of detail. The process for simply simulating a rocket or evaluating the stability of a rocket is much simpler, or at least it can be much simpler, than actually designing a rocket, where people worry, oh no, I've got to enter every part and make sure I get the weights of all the parts right. And the answer is no, you actually don't have to do that. All you want to do is simulate the flight of the rocket and choose motors. All you basically need are the airframe components, so like the nose cone, the body tubes, transitions, and fins. And at the end, you measure the weight. You can set it what's called an override. You measure the weight and where the center of gravity is, and that's it. So all the internal construction, all the materials, all that stuff, you don't need to worry about it. So I definitely see a lot of people on the forum, and the rocketry forum is really where we do support. So if anyone is using it and has questions, that's definitely the first place to go. But I see people asking, I've got, they've built some Estes kit, and they're wondering, hey, I wonder, could I put this motor in it? Could I put this motor in it? How high would it go on this motor? And the answer is, well, you don't need to guess. You've got free software, and you can just enter it in, and it's pretty quick, and it's a good exercise. It's leveling up in your rocketry sophistication to do it that way.
When that's you've said a number of really you made a number of really good points there. First of all, as far as scratch building, it was the same with me. When I first got started, I don't know how long have you been doing model rocketry? I know are you a born again rocketeer?
Yeah, I've got the classic born again rocketeer story. So I did it as a kid in the 70s, and I restarted in 2015.
So I myself am different. I never started as a kid. I had a kit, never built it, didn't have any, guidance or know-how. And so I really got started when I was 40. I got started in my adulthood. And I remember, I buying a copy of the Handbook of Model Rocketry and reading it, and reading about, designing and building your own as opposed to kits. And I thought, well, let's not go crazy here. That's for people who know how to do stuff and make things. And who knows if it'll be stable or what motor I should put in it. Then I found Open Rocket. And also the other catalyst for that was the book Make Rockets, Down to Earth Rocket Science by Mike Westerfield. That's a book that's got a lot of projects in it that are model rockets, but none of them are kits. They're just parts and they're designs. And then, of course, he went on to write a high power book that specifically uses and gives you a tutorial on how to use Open Rocket, on how to build your first high power rocket. Yeah, it's called Make High Power Rockets by Mike Westerfield. And that one, again, it's by Maker Media. So all of the projects in it are DIY projects. So there's no kits in that. They're just scratch built rockets. But his level 1 high power rocket uses parts you can buy off the shelf, but then walks you through creating the design file through Open Rocket so that you can cut out the fins and weigh the rocket and know what different motors are going to do. So it actually takes you through an open rocket tutorial, and which I think is really great. And I don't think there was much on Open Rocket in the model rocket book, but all of his design files are available on his website, which if it's still active and I can find the link, I will post it in the show notes. But so you can actually download the Open Rocket files for his model rocket projects, which I used to build that some of those projects. But the thing is that as far as, simulating a flight, as long as you've got the model to look the right shape, you don't have to know what the parts weigh, because you just get yourself a little kitchen scale, weigh the final model, because it's going to be different after you build it and paint it anyway. And then, you can choose different motors, and I find it really, really helpful. In everything in my fleet, whether it's small or big, low power or high power, I either make or steal a simulation for it. You can make your own, or a lot of people will publish them on the Rocketry forum and other websites, and you can just take them and, weigh your model so you know that the model in your simulation is going to be the same weight. You can override that weight. And then, make sure you got the right delay, because as you say, that's one of the things I find it really useful for beginners, because sometimes you just don't know. And, especially if you've got a larger project and you don't want it to go wrong, that can be really helpful.
Yeah. For high power, and I guess even for mid power and up, really, using a tool like Open Rocket, it's essential. You really can't.
I agree.
Hard to imagine flying a large high powered rocket without having a good sim for it. But some people think, well, for LPO, for low power, you don't really need it. It's not important. It's like, well, if you build a kit and use the recommended motors, you're probably pretty safe without simulating it. But if you buy an Estes kit, they're not going to have recommendations for which Q-jets are going to work.
Exactly.
So you want to try a Q-jet? Oh, well, is it a 4-second delay or a 6? They've got wildly different thrust curves. Find out what it's going to do. Why? There's no reason to guess. It's fun. It's fun to enter it in and get some real data. And after if you fly altimeters, then after you create the full model, you can sort of calibrate the model against the actual readings you get to sort of fine tune it and get it to where it's really accurate.
Right. So you can see, you enter in what the information you have to the simulation. It'll tell you roughly how high it should go. And then once you have the altimeter, you see how high it did go, and you sort of figure out, okay. And that's really useful for things like TARC, the American Rocketry Challenge, which is for those who don't know, it's a design and engineering challenge for middle school and high school students. Every year they fly an egg payload, and there's scholarship money available for those teams. So you want to get a really good, accurate idea of how your rocket's going to fly, and Open Rocket's really useful for that.
Yep, I think if someone's just getting started with it, I think the single most important thing is that even if you design it, scratch built rocket yourself and enter in every part, and even if you weigh every part, still, when you're all done, before you simulate flights, always put in an override for the weight and the center of gravity as you measure it.
That's right.
Because no matter how accurately you measure all your parts, you're not going to be weighing all the glue that you use and the paint. And so the estimates you can get on the weight and the center of gravity and the stability and all those things, while you're in the design phase, are very valuable. But very often when you measure what you've built, it's like, it doesn't quite agree with the estimates and there's variables that the program really can't take into account. So
yeah, my rockets always end up heavier than the parts. If I weigh all of the parts and then I build the rocket and paint it. And just a callback to an episode of The Rocketry Show, our sister podcast. When I was on that a few years ago, I had done some projects where I decided I just want to see how much paint weighs. And so I built a few models, and I was quite surprised that I've got a couple of models where half the weight of the rocket is paint. It's mostly primer. The primer is heavier than the paint, but I leave most of my primer on because I like to get it nice and smooth. I don't like to sand, bare spots, because I find that I get little fuzzies if I do that. And when you do that, you'd be surprised how much weight paint can add. So you do need to weigh your rocket. If you're going to use a simulation program, you need to weigh it when it's done and make sure you know where the center of gravity is.
Yep. It's a good time to mention, if anybody who's in rocketry should have a scale. It's the easiest thing to get.
I agree.
Never guess.
I agree.
Just buy one for $10 off Amazon, and it's a fantastically useful little tool.
I tell you what, I have 3 scales. The one that I use I have one tiny little one that's accurate to 1/10 of a gram, which I find is just it's too accurate. It's too fussy.
Oh, that's the one I use. That's the one I use all the time.
If you breathe on it, the weight changes. Then I have another one that's good for like 125 pounds, and I got to plug that one in. The one that I use the most is the little kitchen scale that I got for, honestly, during the pandemic. I was one of those people making sourdough bread, so I didn't have a scale for the kitchen, so I got this kitchen scale, and it's the least fussy scale I have, and I've used it for all my little rockets. I've even used it for my large high power rocket that's like 1,300 grams, 4-inch diameter rocket. And a scale is, I wouldn't. I mean, you can certainly, if you just want to build kits, you can do it. But I really like the figuring out what the ins and outs of building a model and flying a model, using a scale, using a simulator. Another thing I like is sometimes, like a model rocket will come with a ABC 18 millimeter diameter motor tube, but it's got space in there. And, maybe I want to fly it on a D or an E 24 millimeter motor tube, but I want to make sure the model is still going to be stable. I want to see how high I can expect it to go, because, well, if it's windy, then I might not want to fly it on that D or E motor. And some models I like to make boosters for them and make them 2-stagers. And when you make a 2-stager, you need to make sure that the whole thing is stable, not just the upper stage, but the 2 stages together have to be stable. And then once it drops that first stage, you have to make sure the upper stage is stable. And if you're gonna, alter or modify a kit like that, you need to. I mean, Estes and other model designers, they make sure that the rocket they're giving you is stable. But if you start to fiddle with, the size of the motor or adding boosters, you really need to double check that the rocket's going to be stable. And that's the kind of thing, the principles of stability you can learn about through the Handbook of Model Rocketry. But Open Rocket makes it very simple, because it'll show you where your center of pressure is. And you can find where your center of gravity is when you finally build the model. And you'll be able to see, is this actually going to be a stable model?
Absolutely. And there are definitely times when, particularly probably more in low powered than mid and high, but you have complicated models, sometimes kind of crazy things with cut tubes and fins on fins and all sorts of things. The accuracy of the simulation model can sort of get a little iffy. So you do have to sort of be aware of the limitations of the program. It's using sort of carefully constructed simplifications and approximations of each kind of component. People shouldn't get too confident that anything they can see on the screen is going to be accurately simulated, because not always. So, but for simpler rockets, it's very reliable, very accurate, and as you say, people use it for competitions. People doing college level competitions, Spaceport America and things. They're all using programs like this for for doing all of their modeling.
Now, that was going to be one of my questions, was about the limitations. I have a little bit of an anecdote because this show's about model rocketry. We haven't really talked about high power stuff, but at my club we have college teams that show up to do level 1 certifications because they have aerospace programs. They have people who've never done rocketry before necessarily, and maybe they're going to participate in the Spaceport America Cup or something. And a lot of times you have people who've shown up and they have done a simulation of the rocket that they've built. They built it from scratch, and things go wrong that they don't anticipate because there are limitations. There are things that an open rocket won't tell you. For example, we had someone show up, and a lot of times, this is no offense to anybody in a college team, but sometimes you have people who really want to push the limits. They want to show off a little bit. We had someone show up and they wanted to fly the rocket for their level 1 on an H999, which is an Aerotech motor, high power motor. It's very high thrust. The 999 refers to the fact that it has 999 newtons of average thrust. I think its peak is, I can't remember what, but I did a little bit of calculations. This peak thrust, if you go by pounds, if you're in the United States and you're looking at pounds, is like 351 pounds of thrust in an instant. And it dumps all of that impulse in an instant. Now, I'm sure their simulation told them that they were going to have a fantastic flight. It was going to be really fun. It was going to stay under the waiver, in the waiver with the Federal Aviation Administration that high-power rocketeers have to respect, and that it was going to be so cool because it was going to go so fast. And what they hadn't taken into account was this was a paper rocket, so it was cardboard tube, plywood centering rings probably no thicker than 1/8 of an inch. To be fair, they probably shouldn't have been allowed to fly it, but just as there are, sometimes things slip through. And what happened was the launch button was pressed and the whole rocket just flew apart and the motor went flying. And fortunately, it didn't come anywhere near anybody or anything of any, import, but it was a nerve-wracking moment. Because it just the simulation isn't going to tell you that your glue isn't going to hold or your rocket is made out of too flimsy material. You can simulate a rocket made out of anything, and it'll show you that it'll fly, but that's not necessarily the case.
Yes, Open Rocket does assume that everything's going to hold together, and when people do really high thrust and Mach, supersonic flights, I think they will more likely use things like fin sim and all that'll simulate fin flutter and really get into sort of mechanical nitty gritty of will the thing actually hold together. But that is outside the scope of something that Open Rocket would do.
Yeah, and I don't know if they were using Open Rocket. They may have been using RockSim, which is a program that Apogee Components sells, which has got some similar characteristics to Open Rocket. I don't really know, but we have a lot. We do occasionally have someone who has trusted their sim a little bit too much.
Yeah.
So, and actually, are there any other limitations that you would caution anyone about with Open Rocket?
Well, in general, there are a couple of things that the program will warn you about, like if you have too many fins at some point. The models it uses for fins are only considered to be reliable up to a certain number of fins, or if you have jagged fins or body tube discontinuities. There's a few things that it will specifically warn you about, but then there are some things that it will not warn you about, which is the components that are listed in the first, or actually in the second row of component icons. Those are all really what I would call airframe components.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all treated aerodynamically. Below that, there are internal components, and they are not treated aerodynamically. So one example of something that to program, at least at the moment, hopefully it's something we can fix in the future, but there's no support for ring fins right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have tube fins, but not not ringtails. You have
Right.
big rings that you would be concentric with the main airframe. So what I do, and I love designing with ring fins. So what I always use to visually simulate it is what's called an internal tube, which is what you'd normally use for a motor mount or something like that.
Right.
And that is just completely ignored as far as aerodynamics go.
Right, because it assumes it's inside the rocket.
Yeah, it explicitly excludes it from aerodynamic considerations. So it's good for estimating center of gravity and for testing out how the design looks and the paint job and all that stuff, but not for aerodynamics. So I usually build a second model that has fins instead of the ring fin.
Yeah.
That it sort of uses a cockamamie approximation that I sort of came up with. But in general, things that are internal components are not modeled.
Right. Just to give a visualization of what you're talking about for people who haven't used it. So what you've done is you've taken a tube that is normally inside the body of the rocket, like a motor mount tube, but you've made the size of it large enough so that when you're looking at it on the screen, it's actually outside, larger than the body tube. But because it's an internal component, it's not going to affect the simulation of the aerodynamics.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. And the other thing, now that in the new version where we support pods, it is possible to make all kinds of crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
Where tubes overlap with other tubes. So you only have if you want to have a partial scoop on a rocket, you can do that now.
Yeah.
But the program thinks that the entire tube is in the airflow at that point. It doesn't have a full three-dimensional awareness of how parts intersect with each other and overlap. So you just have to, once you start getting into doing more complicated stuff, you just have to be aware of where the limitations are and make sure that you're not trusting it to be understanding things that it really doesn't understand.
Right.
But for standard, what I would call, standard rocket design, body tubes and fins, you're going to be pretty safe, and it's going to work well.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. All right, it's time to talk about our sponsor, eRockets.biz, your home for unique model rocket kits, as well as the world's largest selection of rocket parts from Semrock. They've been in business since 2009, and eRockets doesn't just stock many of your favorite in-production kits. They also produce their own versions of popular out-of-production models many of you have come to enjoy over the years. And I want to talk to you about one in particular, and that is the Cherokee D, which is a classic Estes kit. There are 3 versions of the Cherokee D, which you can get at eRockets.biz in the Semrock line of rockets. There's the standard Cherokee D, which is a BT-55 size model. It's a nice, beautiful rocket, which has a nice balsa nose cone. This has got a real sleek look. The decals are real nice. I built one myself, and it's one of my favorite flyers. It's one of my favorite kits in the fleet. As a matter of fact, I'm afraid to fly it on a D because it looks so nice. I don't want to get it stuck in a tree. That retails for $29.99. If you like Micromax, they have a tiny little version for $12.99, the Micromax version. But if you like upscales, they've also got the Pro Cherokee, and this is an upscale. It's a 200% upscale with laser-cut plywood fins, slotted body tubes for through-the-wall construction. It includes rail buttons and screw-on motor retention, vinyl decals by Sticker Shock. With a 29-millimeter motor tube, this is a nice, large rocket. It's a 2.6-inch diameter. If you're looking for a really sharp-looking, clean model, a larger model, this would be a good option. As a matter of fact, if you are looking to do a level 1 certification flight, rockets like this, very simple, very nice, very clean. 29 millimeters is really all you need. You could do a level 1 certification on this rocket. It's a beautiful rocket, and it's only $89.99 at erockets.biz. Also, need parts for your own custom builds? Well, there's no problem there. erockets.biz supplies the Semrock line of airframes, nose cones, centering rings, motor mounts, and so much more. eRockets has more rocket parts available than anyone else on Earth. So check out erockets.biz today to learn more. erockets.biz. If rocketry scares you, buy a train set.
Daniel loves your model rocket questions. If you have any, send them to noob@themodelrocketshow.com. That's N00B at themodelrocketshow.com. Now, back to Daniel.
Are there any little known or underrated features of Open Rocket that you'd like to talk about?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Well, there are probably a few things that maybe people aren't super aware of. On one of the menus, the tools menu, there's rocket optimization, which is very, very flexible. And what it lets you do is choose parameters that you want to optimize your rocket for. And let's say, for instance, you want to maximize your altitude.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell it, I want to, that altitude is the parameter that I want to maximize. And I want to let it play with the length of the body tube and the length of the nose cone, just as an example. And you push the button, it will basically run through a sweep of different values for all the different things you want to play with. And it'll tell you the combination of parameters that will give you, in that case, the maximum altitude.
Mm-hmm.
So you can definitely, and because sometimes, as we know, sometimes the lightest rocket does not go the highest. Because sometimes a little bit more mass will help it coast further.
Right.
So you can optimize the nose weight by doing that. So that's a fun tool to play with. There's other good stuff. Well, in the new version, there's definitely a few interesting things in the new version that maybe people haven't tried yet. Other than pods, which are sort of the headline feature.
Right.
One of the headline features.
And pods, we're talking about external tubes with little nose cones on them that you might or might not have motors in them, right?
Possibly, although you don't have to use a tube that you can see. You can use the dreaded phantom body tube, which basically, if you set the body tube of the pod to be 0 diameter, that will generate a warning, by the way, but I think it's generally pretty safe as far as simulation goes.
Right.
And then you attach fins to that, then you can simulate basically fins on fins.
I see.
So you could do, once you have pods, you could do almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the features that really got me involved in Open Rocket, because I knew that the next version was going to have pods. And I was wondering, when's that version coming out? So I sort of got on the mailing list and I started poking. Say, what's going on? And started to try to help, and eventually sort of by accident ended up being on the team. But anyway, other than pods, there are a couple of nifty things that really have just come in a recent beta. One thing you can do now is multi-select different components and edit common parameters all at once.
Oh.
So, for instance, it's really fantastically useful if you are trying to design a paint scheme or something. Mm-hmm. So you can multi-select in the component tree all the components you want, then edit. And if you change the color of that component on the appearance tab, it will change all of them at once. So if you've ever tried to, some people don't really care about the whole visual aspect of things. I do. It's something that I spend a lot of time with my custom designs, trying to design good-looking paint schemes. And if you say, you know what, this rocket was black, but I really want to try it in red, when you've got to go through every component individually to change it, it's really unpleasant.
That's
tedious.
True. Yeah, I use it for that because I'm similar. I like to make them pretty, but sometimes I've got a rocket. I'm like, I don't know what I want this to look like. I have no idea. And I need something I can put color on that looks like the rocket to give myself an idea,
Yeah. So now that's a lot easier to make changes now. Sometimes the changes are so difficult that I kind of gave up on some things. It's like I'm not going through 30 components and changing all the colors one by one again, but no longer. So that's a great new feature that people may not notice. Also in the appearance realm, you can now have different appearances on the two sides of each fin.
Oh,
so if you want to have different decals on a fin on one side versus the other, you can do that. And that's visible in the appearance tab. You can also do that something similar with tubes. They can have a different color on the outside and the inside.
Oh, cool.
So that's kind of fun. Those are the things that pop out to me. Of course, again, I love to play with the appearance of things. Really, I think what's most important about the new version, other than just the vast number of bugs that have been fixed and those new capabilities, there have been a ton of what I would call quality of life improvements in the tool.
Mm-hmm.
So now, for instance, this is something that I was very happy that got implemented. The motor configurations, when you create a new motor configuration,
Mm-hmm.
it automatically opens up the motor selector. Previously, you would create it, it would put a new thing in the list, and you had to go over, click on the motor, and you had to remember to do that all in sequence. Now it just sort of does what you're always going to do anyway. It does it automatically for you.
That's cool.
That's just one little example, but there's a lot of little things like that in there. I think most people will find that overall it is generally nicer to use. And there's basically an infinite amount of work that's still to be done to sort of remove pain points and smooth over workflows and things. But I think it's made a lot of progress, and I'm pretty happy with what we were able to do in this release so far. But yeah, I got a list of 1,000 more things like that I'd love to get done. But we got to prioritize. So we'll see.
I think the reason you and I first touched base is because I think I had said something on Twitter about fins on a transition, which you can't.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes, how could I forget?
Yeah, you couldn't really do in previous versions of OpenRocket, and I was building a V2, and then an Estes V2, which the kit has oversized fins for stability. And when I say fins on a transition, what I mean is, a V2 has the back end of a V2 is what's called a boat tail or a tail cone. And the fins are on that. They're not attached to the body tube itself. They're attached on this part that goes from fatter to narrower, if you're looking at the V2. And OpenRocket wasn't supporting that. And the reason I needed to do that is because I actually cut the fins to scale. So I removed some of the fin, and I needed to know where the new center of pressure was. And because I was potentially going to have to add a little nose weight to make sure the rocket was still stable, because again, I modified the kit. I didn't design it the way Estes had done it. And the actual V2 rocket itself, apart from being, a real missile and having different weight distribution, also had things like, jet vanes and things for stability. So you mentioned that there's this new version coming out, and sort of talked me through back and forth through email trying to get the thing installed on my computer. So now I have the older version and the newer version, and I think that's pretty exciting. The fins on transitions is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and actually, I'm very glad you brought that up, because that was actually one of the tentpole features of the releases. So that a lot of people I know were asking about that on the Rocketry forum over the years.
Yeah,
and it's nice. There were kind of ways to. There were kind of hack approximations prior to that,
right.
But it's always nice when you can do it as the program intends in a supported way, and not have to use hacks. A lot of what we're doing is trying to remove the need for doing hacks, because there will probably always be a certain number of hacks that need to be done. But anytime we can make it properly supported, that's one less thing that people have to go hunting around saying, hey, how do you do this crazy thing? People will come up with various interesting ways to accomplish it, which may or may not actually work that well as far as simulation goes. So that was a good one.
One of the things that would concern me about using a hack like that is, if I do that, I might get something that looks like the rocket, but I don't know if the mathematics involved in making that simulation are going to put the center of pressure where it actually is. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to rely on that for stability. Because stability is in your standard rockets uses something called Barrowman equations. I've been told the math isn't that difficult, but I've looked at the original Barrowman report and I don't understand it. I've forgotten a lot of math since I was in high school. So, I rely on OpenRocket to sort of tell me where things are, where the center of pressure is. And if I'm messing with something and I'm making a hack, I'm like, well, maybe that's where the center of pressure is, and maybe it's not. I have no idea. So
yeah, that's really exactly the point. And I say it's nice when the program can sort of support the feature natively, so you don't have to worry about, am I doing something that's going to be inaccurate because I'm fooling the program somehow.
Right. I tell you, a feature that I like that I didn't discover until just a couple of years after I started using it was something called Open Example. When you go to the File menu and you go down to Open, there's the fourth little icon says Open Example, and it gives you all these rockets that have been designed, from a simple model rocket to a TARC payloader to a boosted Dart high power rocket, a whole bunch of different rockets that have been designed. A lot of them are quite large, that are really fun and interesting to look at, especially if you look at them, in their finished view, which has decals and paint jobs. And I'm actually looking at one right now. It's pretty cool. I don't know how you made that, but
which one are you looking at?
Which one am I looking at right now? The simulation listener example. Wait a minute. Which one is that? That was. I just opened one at random and I don't know what it was called, but there was roll stabilized rocket. Oh, it's the roll stabilized rocket. And then there's a high powered air start. There's cluster rocket design. There's a lot of just sample rockets. So if you don't know how to get started, like what are the parts supposed to look like, things like that. There are samples in here.
It's a very, very good and useful feature. Actually, I didn't really discover them myself for quite a while.
Yeah.
And for people who are just getting started with OpenRocket, the idea of the examples is both to cover the features of the program and also to cover sort of the typical scenarios that one might need to deal with when designing rockets of various sizes.
Mm-hmm.
But for people who are just getting started, if you just open the first one, a simple model rocket, I think Sampo himself created that one way back when. And it's just a perfect example that shows you all of the basic components that go into building a simulation model.
Right.
And it's very, very straightforward. It's 3 fins and a nose cone,
mm-hmm.
and it's got all the internal stuff. It's got a number of different motor simulations. So it's a really great way to get started, to just sort of see. I mean, frankly, if the model you're building is 3 fins and a nose cone, you really couldn't start with that and just change things.
Just change it, right?
Just change it to match what yours. I just realized one other feature I should mention is this new version has included Dave Cook's really excellent component library that he has maintained separately from the Open Rocket for a number of years. And for this release, we included it in the program so you didn't have to go through a little bit of gymnastics to try to install it with your copy of Open Rocket. So I think that's a really, really nice improvement as well. It's quite extensive. It doesn't have everything in the world, but it really has most of what you would need in most cases. And the old version of Open Rocket really had a fairly outdated parts library. So very often you had to go and sort of enter all the parameters yourself. But definitely, again, for people who are starting out, go to the, when you're editing a component and you have the little component edit dialog open, you go up to the right, select preset. It'll pull up a very nice list of components. That's, again, it's really quite extensive. And you can just pick from parts that exist rather than trying to figure out what to create yourself from scratch. Really makes things go more quickly.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just looking at it right now. If you wanted to just start designing, it's pretty simple. You open it up and there's a design window down at the bottom, and there's a parts window up at the top, and then there's just components. You just start by clicking on nose cone. You can, make the nose cone in any size, any shape you want, and you add a body tube, and you add fins of various shapes and all that stuff. It's pretty simple. It might take, if you're just trying to figure it out yourself. I know that it took me a while to sort of figure out, how to do it and how to, get things to look the way I wanted them to. But are there any tutorials that the people can look at?
Well, there are a couple of what are called guided tours inside the program under the help menu.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not even know those existed until recently when they got updated. They're a little bit helpful. They kind of run through some of the screens and the components of the screen, like what you mentioned, the rocket view, the component tree, the component button. So they're sort of like a little slideshow to show things, and it's good little starter. On the wiki, there's an Open Rocket wiki that I don't have the URL for in my head at the moment.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Sure. There is a tutorial there. There isn't what I would call yet the definitive introductory tutorial to Open Rocket. I've thought about writing it in the past, but it's a fairly time-consuming task, and I haven't really gotten to it. But when you look at all the different sources, you should be able to, any beginner, I think, ought to be able to piece together how to do the basics. And something that I always try to emphasize on the Rocketry forum is try it. And if you need help, just post and ask for help. There are loads of people, including right now, everyone on the Open Rocket team is on the forum and responding to help requests. So the one thing I would ask and emphasize is if you're running into a problem and you're asking for help, please post the file that you're working on. And if possible, post a screenshot of what looks wrong. A lot of times we have people say, I'm trying to do this and it's not working. What's the problem? Well,
right.
Show me.
Yeah, show me.
I can't guess. So it saves time. If you provide all the info up front, we can answer you as quickly as possible rather than going back and forth. So, but yeah, there's tons of help to be had. And it's hard for me to imagine that anybody would be incapable of figuring it out between the online help and the built-in help in the program and the wiki tutorials. And various people have made tons of YouTube videos on how to use Open Rocket. If you search for Open Rocket on YouTube, you'll find plenty.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's more than enough help at easily accessible for people to be able to figure it out and learn it. So no excuses. Load it, try it.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to play around with.
It's fun and it's just useful,
It's very useful. Yeah. A lot of times when I'm prepping for a launch for the next day, I will run a bunch of sims. I'll sort of look at my fleet and go, what do I want to fly? And then, I run different simulations based on, okay, if it's not windy, what can I fly this on? If it's really windy, what should I fly on? Because, we've had a few days where it's been really, really calm and I can put something way up there. And then other days where we get to the field and it's nice to have an idea in mind of what are my options if it's windier than I'm expecting. And it's just fun to play around with. The way I got started building my own was I just went on to a website, a vendor, and I just saw what parts were available. And I just, what size they were and everything. And then using those parts, I just sort of played around with the length of body tubes and shapes of fins. And then I came up with a rocket that I thought, that looks pretty good. I'll build that. And I built that and it was great. And I could have done that without OpenRocket because I just, I don't have drafting skills.
Yeah, honestly, for me, I'm very visual, and I really like to see what it's going to look like in the 3D. You get very nice 3D rendered views, and I've gotten to the point now where I designed all my decals and I designed all my paint schemes and everything, and when I finished building my models, they look so close to the renders that OpenRocket outputs that sometimes I can't actually tell whether I'm looking at a render of the rocket because you can really make it look exactly as it is. Of course, that means that there's no exciting surprise at the end what it looks like because it looks like pretty much exactly what I designed. But for me, that's a huge feature. I really want to know exactly what it's going to be when it's done.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like that because before I got into rocketry, I was never the kind of person where I could say, imagine a thing and then make that thing and have it look like I wanted it to look. When I was a kid, I always tried to make things and they just looked terrible. They just didn't come out the way I was imagining them, and usually I was trying to build, turn my bike into an airplane with some cardboard boxes or something. But, and of course they didn't fly. But even worse than that is they didn't look like the airplanes I was imagining these cardboard boxes turning into. But with OpenRocket and rocketry, I finally learned how to actually take something and make it the way I want it to look. And even if that's the paint job on the, on the kit, if I'm building a kit. But if it's something where I'm designing it, I like the fact that I can come up with an idea and then build the thing and it looks the way I imagined it,
Yeah, I think I love that. For me, that's the fun part of designing. I don't build everything I design. Sometimes I just come up with a pretty render and say, yeah, I'll put that one aside for now. But I just think it's tremendously fun and rewarding to do that.
Yeah. I have a lot of projects that I've started on OpenRocket and I haven't finished yet. I've got a few that I've some ideas I've been toying around with for years of like testing different models. And, I'm talking about like middle school science fair project type stuff, airfoils versus non-airfoils versus, And so I've designed all of these things in OpenRocket. And of course, I haven't gotten around to building them because I'm like, well, do I really feel like building 50 rockets or did I just want to design that in OpenRocket?
Yeah, sometimes it's like the OpenRocket modeling is the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes. I think that's been something that has been a way that some school classes, some rocketry, in addition to the exercise where they'll actually build a rocket, I know sometimes what they're learning in class is how to use OpenRocket and how to understand the relationships between fin placement and fin size and center of pressure and stability and all that. You can learn a lot just from playing around inside the program and not even actually building anything. Although obviously building and flying is the ultimate goal, but you can learn a lot just from experimenting in the program and say, oh, if I do this sort of thing, is this going to be more stable?
Yeah.
Going to be more draggy?
I forgot to mention that. Actually, several years ago, I taught a model rocket class two summers in a row, and I used Open Rocket, and we did things like we all designed a rocket together, or we would run simulations of the rockets we were building. We had to keep the altitudes kind of small, but I wanted to give them an idea of, okay, so on the A motors we're flying these on, these are probably going to go about 200 feet. But what if we put a C or a D in there? And that was a lot of fun. And I didn't have a high power certification at the time, and these were like 11 to 14-year-olds, and we were in a parking lot, so we weren't going to fly a high power rocket, but we could build one in Open Rocket if we wanted to, which we did, and I had a lot of time to kill, so it was a lot of fun to play around with that and show these kids this. And I think that several of them went home and downloaded it, and I know several of them got into model rocketry after taking that summer camp.
That's great.
Yeah,
Great.
That's right. Well, the website is openrocket.info. We'll post a link to all of that in the show notes. And do you have anything else to add, Neil?
I do have one other thing I would like to add. We have repeated many times that Open Rocket is free and open source, and that is true and will continue to be true, but we will be starting to fundraise sometime soon. And the specific reason for that is that there are fees that we are going to have to pay to sign the application so that you won't get a million warnings when you try to install it. So each of the different software platforms has signing rules. I shouldn't say each. Basically, Windows and Mac have app signing rules that are you have to get certificates from. In the Apple's case, it's Apple, and in Windows, there's some other providers for it. But you have to get certificates so that when you install the program, your computer believes that it is not malware or something else, and you don't get 100 messages discouraging you from installing it, which is kind of the case right now with the betas. So there are instructions on the website on how to go through that whole process. But we will be, again, doing some completely voluntary fundraising. Sometime soon, we'll be posting information about that. And if people want to contribute a bit, then that's great.
I do see a donate icon on the openrocket.info website. So
yeah, it is live, but we haven't talked about it yet.
Okay.
It's a bit of a process to sort of organize to where you can accept funds. And we've chosen a particular platform where all of our funds and expenditures will be completely transparent. They'll be able to see exactly how much we have and what we're spending it on. So again, completely voluntary, but we hope that folks who've gotten value out of the program will consider a small donation. And again, we'll be talking about that more in the future, but I just wanted to get that out there. The one other thing is try the beta. If you have problems, please report them. You can either just report it on the Rocketry forum, or you can go to GitHub and report there. Or if you have suggestions, post them onto GitHub or on the Rocketry forum. And if you want to contribute, we have a Slack, we have mailing lists. We'd love to get more contributors. We have a nice stable team right now, but we could always use more help. So anybody is welcome who wants to get involved in any capacity whatsoever.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Neil Weinstock. Thanks for talking to us about Open Rocket. And if you have any updates or any news, let us know, and we will let folks know. We are going to have another episode on sort of the more advanced aspects of Open Rocket for people interested in high-power rocketry on our sister program, The Rocketry Show, at TheRocketryShow.com. So be on the lookout for that. But we wanted to get you on here on the Model Rocket Show at themodelrocketshow.com to talk about this, especially because, a lot of people getting involved in model rocketry don't even know that this is an option. There's free software. It's really cool. You can use it, you can download it, and you can play around with it, and you can figure out some stuff, and you can it's a really great tool in your toolbox, and you can really expand your understanding and enjoyment of model rocketry with this free program. So thank you very much, Neil Weinstock.
Thanks, Daniel. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. All right, that's the Model Rocket Show at TheRocketryShow.com. Hope you liked it. Thanks very much to my guest, Neil Weinstock. By the way, I do have an Etsy shop with rocketry and space-themed things like T-shirts and hoodies and mugs and stuff like that. And I'll post a link to that on our show notes at TheModelRocketShow.com. I have a promo code that'll save you 10% off of my shop if you use the words Model Rocket Show, all one word, Model Rocket Show. That's your promo code. That'll save you 10% off of my Etsy shop. So yeah, check it out. All right, that's the show. As always, build well, fly safe, and we'll catch you next time.
This show is brought to you by the support of our sponsors and listeners. If you wish to support the show for just a few dollars a month, please become a patron by visiting patreon.com/The Rocketry Show. Don't forget to check out our sister show, TheRocketryShow.com, a program that is all about advanced and high-power rocketry. The views and opinions expressed on these programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Little Beth Entertainment or its sponsors.